מתחילים. So welcome everybody. Thank you for attending today's workshop. We will be hearing four very interesting lectures, about 15 minutes each. Then we'll have 10 minutes tops like discussion. And with no further delay, I will introduce Munir Moad.
Okay.
Okay.
All right.
So,
okay.
share screen.
איפה זה?
לא אתם, זום.
איפה אנחנו עושים את השאר סקרין?
הנה.
share screen, right?
כן.
וזה.
שאני אציג אותך כאילו.
בסדר. תודה. אוקיי, הצגנו את עצמנו.
כן.
All right.
So, just let's start.
Okay, we're beginning. As I told you already, my dissertation was about the Jews' doctrine, and it was called Between Hidden and Visible, the monotheistic religions in the eyes of the Jews' doctrine. This is actually the title of my dissertation, and it aims to clarify the status of the monotheistic religions as they were dealt with within the doctrine, I mean the Jews' doctrine. It is also possible to refer to it as the syncretistic interwoven relations among the monotheistic religions from the Jews' doctrinal point of view. The purpose of this self-theological exposure is to detect the geopolitical changes that took place back then. In fact, these changes were the reasons behind the severe polemical attitude which was held by the Jews propagandists and adamantly expressed in their epistles, which are called later the wisdom books, which later also became, as it's known, the Druze religion. However, one might wonder what is visible and what is hidden. Why did I call it visible? What is hidden about it? So to clarify the idea, I am required to go back to history. As you may know, the nature of the monotheistic religions were kind of loaded with heavy antagonistic articulation, which was reflected boldly by polemical relations and reprobations. Polemical literature actually were in fact a phenomenon that began in the Greek literature and paved its way into Judaism, later into Christianity, and only then back into the Islam. The most important part, once we speak about the Druze doctrine, we always go back to the Islam. In Islam, which is the kernel of the dissertation, it was possible to say that the theological and political changes took place in 3 rounds. The reasons behind the birth of the Druze doctrine are traced back to the middle of the 2nd round. Is actually sorted in the 3rd one. In the 1st round, which lasted approximately for 28 years after the death of Muhammad the Messenger and the death of Ali ibn Abu Talib, that is to say between 632 and 661. This 1st round actually did not have any theological disputes, but rather political ones. However, the dormant dispute over the Islamic hegemony within those 28 years absolutely held the fertilizing seeds of the theological ones that took place later. The death of Ali in 661 was actually the spark that launched the second round. For the first time, the Islamic hegemony was divided into two parts. This prominent dissection created a very significant turning point in the Islamic history. For the first role in identifying being factionalized Islam. In fact, it epiphanizes the most crucial schism in Islam. Imam happened to be the title in the Shi'i side, while successor stayed in the Sunni side, which is known as Khalifa. Certainly, it stayed in the Umayyad side. The Umayyad side actually ruled for approximately 150 years until the Abbasi ruled back then. Okay, so I personally claim that this round in Islamic history, which lasted almost 104 years, that is to say between Ali, the sixth Imam who died in Ali, the first Imam who died in 661, and Ja'far al-Sadiq, the sixth Imam who died in 765. Actually, this period prepared the ground for more theological developments. And his son Ja'far al-Imam, the fifth Imam Ja'far al-Sadiq, and his father Muhammad al-Baqir were the first people who started to claim that the Quran was actually forged. That was the problem in Islam. They were dissected into two parts. One of them claimed that the Quran was forged and the other said no. Anyway, with the death of Ja'far al-Sadiq, the third round of the Islamic factionalism just started. In fact, that was the second Islamic factionalism and the first Shi'i one. Musa al-Kadhim was the seventh Twelver Imam, while Ismail was the seventh Imam of the Ismaili side. It means they stayed in two parts. In every part there was an Imam, each one of them was the seventh one. Okay. And on the Twelver side, everything was already over by the great occultation, the minor occultation of the Imam, which was called Al-Hasan al-Askari by the year. I have to go on with this. Okay, never mind. Never mind. It's not go. Okay. Okay. All right. So in 874, which was followed by the great occultation around the year 941. However, in the Ismaili side, the factionalism of the factionalistic line went on and on. It is crucially important to bear in mind that both sides, the Twelvers and the Ismaili, were persecuted by the Abbasid for the same reasons. And actually the reasons were giving the Quran esoteric and typological and also allegorical interpretation. That was the reason behind adopting the principle of dissimulation. The result of the Abbasi regime pushing created what they did not expect. And okay, we cannot, it's possible to go on. Okay, one more. Okay. By the year 893, an independent Ismaili branch began to crystallize in North Africa. They fled from the north of the Levant to reside in Morocco. By the year 899, the Ismaili propagandists and the followers launched a revolution against the Abbasid regime, which resulted in establishing a new realm, if possible to say, within 10 years. In 909, the Fatimid state was established and lasted approximately for 171 years. By the year 969, they actually conquered Egypt. And by the year 996, Al-Hakim bi Amrillah, who was the sixth Khalifa or the sixth Imam, began a new religion, which was called later the Druze religion. This new religion was one more step in the long line of the Shia factionalism. Not to forget, the Fatimid regime faced a domestic and external pressure, which by the year 1021, Al-Hakim, along with his assistant, who was called Hamza ibn Ali, who was considered to be the creator of the Druze doctrine and probably the great architect of this religion, went through an occultation. Between 1021 1043, the message of Hamza is continued by one more appointed propagandist, and his name was Baha'u'ddin, who happened to be the most conspicuous, probably the prominent as well, among those who started writing the Druze religion. Now, like the rest of the or any ethnic minority in the world, not only in the Middle East, specifically once we speak about the Middle Ages, the Druze were persecuted like the Ismaili. They went to live on the top of the mountains while they are surrounded by a bigger, different ethnic group. In such cases, secrecy and different ways of leaders or leadership is required. In fact, it is either to give up your religious beliefs and develop instrumental identity and become an integral part of the majority, or to enclave your existence in a specific geographical spot where you can fortify your existence and beliefs. And by doing so, you would be bolstering your primordial identity. Since the Druze took the second way, because they were minority, they were forced to keep their beliefs and religion or religious ideas hidden, while their external policies were visible, which were reflected by developing and embracing the principle of loyalty. Hence, the religion was kept in secret for 1,000 years. They were not at liberty to disclose it, but certainly today everything is already known. Now, because of all these things, my dissertation had many different questions. What was written there? What the 206 epistles held within them? Why the propagandists were so furious? And many other questions actually are to be answered in the thesis itself. That's it. Thank you very much for listening. Do you have any
Thank you,
questions?
Munir. I think it
Okay.
was eye-opening, very
Thank you.
insightful,
Thank you very much.
because I think as is where we most of us don't know much about Druze.
Yeah, that's probably right. That is probably right. A lot of people do not know about the Druze, and what they do know actually happens to be only from what was written about the cultural side of the Druze people, since they have been living here in Israel and certainly in different places around the world. And they have been serving in the army, for example, at least for the last 60 years. So people do not know a lot about them if we, in terms of their doctrine. So there is a big difference between what was written in the doctrine and what they have in their cultural life, the ambience that they live within. They develop different principles which are totally different from what was written in the doctrine itself 1,000 years ago. It's not easy to share people with the secrets of the religion, because usually it is not acceptable to do so. Back in 1865, if I'm not mistaken, one guy from Lebanon, his name was Sulaiman al-Adhani. Adhani, it's a small place, Adhaniya, small place, who spoke about the Nusayriya Alawiya religion. Unfortunately, he was killed for that. 1975, Abdullah al-Najjar also happened to be a Druze guy who wrote about the Druze religion and exposed almost everything was written there. Unfortunately, he also was killed along with his wife. 1985, Muhammad Mahmoud Taha from Sudan, but he is Islam, not a Druze. Tried to dissect the two parts of the Quran, the Makki one and the Madani one. He claimed that the world is accusing the Islam in terrorism just because of the second part of it. So we have to get rid of the second part. So he was hanged for that as well. So it's not an easy task to deal with secrets of religion or deal with what is written over there. But certainly it's a fact that should be dealt with sooner or later. I happen to be the person who would do that. And I've been doing this since 2016. Hopefully to finish.
So the books themselves are not published or translated.
No.
So what do you work with? How do you work?
How did I do that? Yeah, it's not a secret anymore. You can find them in the internet. What happened actually back in the civil war, which erupted in Lebanon back in 1975, a lot of interested people from France, such as Sylvestre Dissassi and Daniel Desmet, people who were interested in knowing about the Jewish community and religion. So they managed to buy the books or to get their hands on, I don't know how, but they managed to have the books. And they had written about the doctrine of the Jewish community. We are talking about 111 epistles. Certainly we have more than that. We have at least 206 of them. But the core of the religion is actually embedded within 111 epistles, which were dealt in many different places by different researchers, just like Dissassi and others. So they are called at the same time the wisdom books, and we are not allowed to use them as long as we are secular people. We have to be religious people in order to do that. It's quite even, I would say, dangerous to deal with them, because you are dealing with things that were hidden for a long, long time. Yes, if you have more questions. Yes.
Thank you, for excellent talk. I want to follow up on Omar's question about sources. Maybe you can tell us what kind of sources do you use in your dissertation besides the doctrines, and what kind of academic research exists already on
in the doctrines?
Religion, and I mean, part of what community are you in academically?
Yeah, unfortunately, we don't have a lot of academic books which were written about the doctrine itself, specifically here in Israel, if we are talking about Israel. But certainly there are many different books which were written in Arabic and French about the religion itself. There are many other books that can give us a hint or actually guide us into the reasons why the epistles were written just like that. And they are also considered to be kind of religious books. For example, there is a book which is called Ad-Durar al-Madiyya. It's difficult to translate these names into English, even into Hebrew. Khabaya Jawahir, many different books which cannot be found in the internet, and they are still among the religious people. So I managed to get them one way or another. I managed to get all these books and dealt with them and tried to understand, at least from the historical point of view, why these epistles were written the way they were written. Okay, so what was the second question, or the second part of the
The
question?
question was, what kind of academic research already exists on Druze religion, and do you feel like this research is, I mean, I'm sure it's one of its kind, but do you have people, an academic community to work with, or do you find yourself, solo on this?
As I said before, I think 90% of the community itself would not accept the idea of exposing everything. So maybe that was the reason that you cannot find any academic research until I came, okay, till I thought about it. Once again, if you go to different countries where the issue of the Druze community is not secretive anymore, it's not confidential anymore, you can find research in Syria, for example, in Lebanon. And thanks to the internet, that today we can get some of these researchers back there. The only difference is that here in Israel, we cannot find books that speak about the doctrine of the Jews. Out of courtesy, they didn't want to hurt their feelings. I'm pretty sure that a lot of people already managed to read the wisdom books. For example, if you go to Hebrew University, Professor Meir Bar Asher, who is well known here in Israel as one of the probably most significant, I would say, person in Israel who deals with religions. Either we talk about the Alawi Nusayri or Al-Qaramita or the Druze or the Shia, whatever. He is really, I would say, is the second pioneer one, because Hava Lazarus Yafa happened to be the first one. Unfortunately, she died almost 10 years, probably 12 years, I don't remember exactly when, but he already dealt with this polemical epistles. Some of these epistles dealt with Judaism, some of them dealt with Christianity. The overwhelming majority of all these 111 epistles dealt with Islam. And it was kind of antagonistic way that can be identifying the epistles themselves. Unfortunately, you can find a lot of researchers about this. Maybe next year when I publish my own, so you can have it and have a look at it. Okay.
Thank you very much. Yeah, I have 3 questions.
You just wrote it?
What?
He was
Yeah,
preparing.
I wrote my question. No, think as in English, no, it's too much more. So the first question is from the social point of view. I think I hope I'm accurate with the terms, the Okal and the Juhai, right?
No, that's right.
And the religious. Is there a difference that the smart kids or the more religious character kids become Okal, or it's the other way? Does parents want their kids to become Okal? Is there a difference socioeconomic between these two groups?
Yeah.
That's the first question. The other questions are a bit more academic. Yeah, I saw that you were ambivalent regarding the definition of Jews as a religion. So that I hope I saw right, but you hesitated when you said we can call it religion, we can or not.
Okay, no,
Maybe I misunderstood.
it's possible to call it a religion as an independent one, Certainly, the point, if you read the religion, if you happen to go over it, you would understand that there is one main purpose, is to get out of the Islamic, get out of the Islamic idea. That's why it is possible to call it also as antinomiistic religion, because they do not follow the Islamic rules, or do not follow the Islamic rituals. Okay, there is no Hajj, for example. There is no zakah. There is no shahada. There's nothing. So it's possible, and usually religious people try to be independent. That's why they can refer to it as an independent religion. It's not a branch out of. Historically, it could be considered as a branch out, because we are talking about chronology where you really just branched out. However, there are many different researches which were written probably 5 years ago in the Technion and Haifa University, where they actually tried to trace back the Druze origin to the Judaism. But all these claims still kind of weak. You cannot really rely on all these things. And they speak about, for example, if I don't know whether you heard about the Yiturim, who happened to be part of the Hashmonaim in the 1st century BC. And they speak about Yohanan Horkinus and Yehuda Aristobulus, actually, who made the rest of the people around them convert into Judaism. They do believe that the Yiturim in the Galilee were forced to become Jewish, and it is possible to trace it and say that since the Jews believe in Yitro, okay, they could be the offspring of the Yiturim. So this is one of the things that they are trying to bolster, which is what is called the instrumental identity here in Israel. Joining the army and working in many different governmental branches was not enough. They needed kind of theological idea to make the connection between Druze and the Jews stronger.
Yeah.
So, sorry, where is the idea where it's not academic research?
It is. It is.
Okay.
It is. I'm talking about the Technion. We are speaking about even genetic research, and with cooperation with Haifa University, and it was published 5 or 6 years ago in one of the books of Shimon Avivi, if I'm not mistaken, who had written Tasni Hostet. Okay, but there is an idea like that where they want to be kind of the whole society. Okay. On the other hand, you can see that a lot of people still working to go back to their own primordial identity. Those who believe that that the Jews are real Islam and the core of the Islam and so on. So Uqal and Juhal is kind of dissection between the two sectors, and there is almost no connection between them. There's almost no relation between both sides. People believe that since they are religious, they happen to be the Uqal, which I do not agree at all. Sometimes they are totally the other side, they ignorant, I would say. And but they and the other side, who happen to be the non-religious, happens to be the Juhal. They don't know anything, as if they can say. The hegemony, anyway, in the hands of religious people. Everything in the hands of religious people.
David, we need to like.
And maybe we can talk about it. I'll ask if you can answer briefly. Other religions, mostly European, had in the last 500 years, had to change themselves in order to stay relevant. Stay widely. And think about the shift from Latin to vernacular. I'm not speaking about Protestantism. Judaism has its own version of it. And it seems from what you say that the Jews did not go through this democratic or semi-democratic shift, and it still works. or what?
I hope that I understood the question. Where was the question in all this?
No, I asked how does it work? But they didn't do this shift, and it still works. The Jewish community still stands.
What shift you are talking about?
The shift from Latin to vernacular in Catholic. Modernization.
Okay, so you are talking about the dissimulation or assimilation, you mean?
Assimilation, modernization of the adaptions and modernization
Okay.
of the clergy and the religion.
Yeah, I tried to speak about it. I said there is, which is called the instrumental identity. People in Israel, not only in Israel, wherever they happen to be. For example, I met a lot of people in the United States back in 2016, Druze who have been living there for 100 years. Okay, they do feel like American, and they actually will branch in many different ways, and you cannot feel that they are Jews, but it is really still working today, because I believe being isolated, being estranged, being dissected from the rest of the people, as you know, the Jews live only in the mountains, and that could be the reason how they actually managed to go on with their own identity. Either it's the instrumental or the primordial one. Okay, hope you answered the question.
Finish this discussion later.
Yeah.
Okay. So thank you, Munir.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Okay.
Okay.
So, Simon, you have a something?
Can I take this off, or is it?
מישהו יודע לתפק אני חושב של ראיה?
Do you have another?
זה ש...
מה רצית לעשות?
דיסק-און-קי.
Okay. I didn't see it. Thanks. So. It's not mine. Just it's changing.
Okay.
But we still have the other box.
I don't know what's the difference between them.
As long as I can see it and you can see it, it's
Yeah, but you need to. You need the presentation. Which one is sharing?
I don't know.
Yeah, it's weird, right? Stop share. Okay. Why is it? Why did it open it? כן, זה פתח מלא מצב, כאילו מלא מצגות. That one? Okay. לא, מוניר תוכל אם אנחנו עושים תצוגה, עכשיו איך אני עושה את הזום, ואת מה אני בוחרת, כאילו,
עכשיו הזום עדיין פתוח?
הזום פתוח.
אוקיי, תעשו.
אם אני רוצה לעשות share screen.
הנה.
זהו.
איפה אתה מתחיל? Where do you begin? With which one? This
Yeah,
one,
with
right?
yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Here's the Zoom
Okay,
is working. Here's your. Now, the moment you
Oh,
want
can
to
I
go
change?
on,
Okay.
I think with one of these, you have to try.
I think yeah, the right one. Left.
Is it working? What the hell? Yeah, that's exactly what happened to me. It didn't move on. Okay, this is one. This is, oh, it's the same. All of them are the same,
דוד,
right?
יש למישהו מושג למה ראיה רצתה שזה יהיה בזום?
כן, אבל זה לא מפריע.
אפשר להעביר.
גם אצלי לא עבר.
כן,
או תחצי פה.
בוא נראה.
הנה, עכשיו.
I also have it in PDF if you.
No, I don't think that's the problem. The problem is Zoom.
Are we on Zoom?
No, this is just recording your lecture. You're not on Zoom. דוד, אולי אתה תוכל לעזור פה?
אני חושב שלא קשור.
זה לא בעיה של מחשב, נראה לי יש פה.
אם הוא בזום, זה לא מעביר את המצגת.
למה זה לא מדלג? זה גם קרה לי.
לא, אנחנו לא רואים את זה. מה?
זה החיבור בין המחשב לבין הפארק הוא לא מעביר. עכשיו זה צריך לעבור.
בסדר? כן, כן, בוא נראה שעושה share screen. Okay, I think we leave it this way. Okay.
Okay. And how do I change the slides?
Well, you just change. יותר מזה אני לא יודע מה לעשות. Screen. Yeah, I think it works.
Okay. So
Okay.
I change with
Just go like this.
כן, וזה לא, וזה הוא נדפק.
No, yeah, here it worked. Here you go. Okay?
בוא נראה.
yeah, it's not.
It's not working.
No, no.
כי זה לא מעביר את השקופית, שזה ככה. למה?
Ah, okay.
Just roll it, okay?
Okay. So I think we will just start because everybody also always like also introduced themselves. So Simon, I made a speech, but
Yeah, I know.
Yeah.
Thank you anyway. So yeah, hello to everybody. I'm happy to be here, meeting all of you and hearing more about your research and your perspectives. Today, I would like to give you a quick overview about my PhD topic. And therefore, I would like to give you a brief introduction into the topic, explaining my basic research question and providing some first insights into my material. So it's changing, right? First of all, a quick overview what my project is about. My topic takes up the military conflict, also known as Turkish wars in German historiography, between the Habsburgs and the Ottomans in the 16th till the 18th century, which in return is part of a long-lasting conflict between the Ottomans and a number of other European states. The time frame is stretched from the first siege of Vienna in 1529 till the end of the Great Turkish War in 1699. And the regional focus lies on Southeast Europe, including Constantinople. So I'm focusing on mainly the way from Vienna to Constantinople through Hungary, Serbia, and other Ottoman provinces. And yeah, this area is a geographical space that was for a long time under Byzantine and Orthodox influence until it was shaped by the Ottoman conquest. I would like to approach this subject by dealing with travel logs or travel writings, early modern travel writings, a medium that is of relevance for many points of view. And the method I have chosen therefore includes close reading, text comparison between the different travel logs, and it's everything in a broader context of a discourse analysis. Before I go into more detail about my sources, however, I would like to give you a brief review of the historical events. If you look at the map on the right, you can see the Ottoman expansion from their beginning to their broadest extent in the 16th century. And yeah, if we the fall of Constantinople in 4053, what not just meant the final end of Byzantium, but was already seen as a turning point in history by the shocked European contemporaries. And the Ottoman expansion continued in the following decades, so that by the beginning of the 16th century, the empire spread over a large part of the Balkan Peninsula, Anatolia, and the Middle East. By coincidence or not, it's covered a lot of the territories of the old East Roman Empire. And when the young Hungarian king, Louis II, died in the Battle of Mohacs in 1526, without leaving an heir to the throne, the conflict finally reached Central Europe. With the Habsburgs and the Ottomans, two dynasties claiming world domination clashed, which ideologically increased the whole conflict even further. So yeah, the Habsburgs claimed the Hungarian throne for themselves, and as you know, they were also emperors of the Holy Roman Empire. So, and kings in Spain and in the Netherlands. So a big territory in this time. Yeah, and this clash, this clash in Hungary, this prepared the initial setup that should characterize the conflict for the next 200 years. So the first Austrian-Ottoman War started with the siege of Vienna in 1529 and ended 1568. And yeah, Hungary was divided into a Habsburg, or like an Austrian part, an Ottoman part, and there was the semi-autonomous Principality of Transylvania, and a series of wars between the two empires followed, in German better known as Turkish Wars. These hostile episodes were interrupted by the periods of diplomatic relation and cultural exchange. So to preserve the fragile peace, the Habsburgs paid regularly tributes to the Ottomans and sent delegation frequently to Constantinople for keeping the peace. And some people from these diplomatic corps stayed there in Constantinople for years and had the chance to learn more about their enemies in general. It is important, therefore, and I would like to make this quite clear, that to view Ottoman-Habsburg relation is not just a continuing story of conflict, it's also a history of interaction. And in fact, until today, the relationship between Turkey and the rest of Europe is still a very special one. One reason for this persistence of this special discourse about the Turks is, one reason for this is that the discourse about the Turks is deeply rooted in the European identity and memory. So I'm talking about the so-called Turkish fear. It's a phenomenon that should shape the perceptions of the Ottomans as Turks from the 15th century until the 18th century and even beyond. And this discourse was initiated by religious and secular authorities to primarily intended to serve their own political goals. And the propaganda shaped the image of the cruel, barbaric, and tyrannic Turks as the ultimate and inherited arch enemy of the Christians. And those served even as a catalyst for the European identity. The newly invented printing press enabled the massive spread of so-called Turkica, and so prints dealing with the Turks, and opened up the discourse to a broader section of society. But this topic, the Turkish fear, appears not just in prints, but also in sermons, in songs, and even in taxation. And yeah, on the right side, you can see two woodcuts from the early 16th century in Germany, and the imagery with the imprisoned Christians, the murdered women, and the impaled children speaks that clear language of that time. So why would I like to analyze this discourse about the Turks and the war with them based on travelogues, you might ask? First, travelogues are one of the most popular literature in this time, which makes it a medium with a highly discursive impact. And the travelers gave comprehensive accounts of the events in the Ottoman Empire, its society, its politics, the culture, the religion, and also the military. And therefore, the information seemed to be authentic and empirical. Some historians noted that the travelogues on the Ottoman Empire largely lacked the hostile language of other prints about the Turks, and even considered them to be objective or neutral. I'm talking about modern historians. With their accounts of the distant lands, foreign people, and extraordinary events, they are not just sources. No, sorry, there's a question. But how likely is it that the authors who had grown up in this spirit of Turkish threat could report objectively about their enemies? So with their accounts of the distant land, foreign people, and extraordinary events, they are not just sources about the descripted subjects, but also provide some insight into the worldview of the authors and the readers. Since it's impossible to examine all early modern travel reports on the Ottoman Empire, I must limit my sources. And so far, I have been working with travelogues by German authors, or rather authors from the Holy Roman Empire who traveled to Constantinople. And yeah, my general research question is how war is mentioned, or how war is a subject of discussion in these travelogues. You know, our graduate school is about war culture, and that's where the interest is coming from. And yeah, on the right side, you can see the front page of one of these travelogues by Salomon Schweiger, one of my main sources. He was a Protestant theologist and joined a diplomatic legation in 1576 as a preacher, and he published his report years later in 1608. Sadly, the people from the 17th century didn't know about short titles, so that's the whole title of the book, and I will translate just the important phrases for you. That is a new report on a journey from Germany to Constantinople and Jerusalem, including from the occasion of these lands, cities, places, buildings, and people. Furthermore, about the Holy Grave in Jerusalem, also about the legation of the Holy Roman Emperor to the Supreme Court. Moreover, about the Turkish Empire, its government, policy, and court, collected in 3 different books by Salomon Schweiger and printed in Nuremberg 1608. Yeah, as you can see, he not just visited Constantinople, but he continued his journey to the Holy Lands, which is impressive. Yeah, let's say it like this. Yeah. Yeah. So what I find in the sources, I divide into what I call depictions of war and interpretations of war. And depictions of war, I understand all the descriptions that are related to war, like on the one hand, the impact of war, campaigns, famous battles, sieges, battlefields, war devastation, destruction of cities and regions, and also Christian prisoners of war, but also the description of Ottoman military in its structure, the single units, and strategic fortifications. These are all things that travelers are mentioning in their travel writings. And yeah, sometimes you even find illustration, as you can see on the right, in this case, the Janissaries and the Sipahis, or the Christian prisoners led to Constantinople. So yeah, and about interpretation of war, in the context of these descriptions, you can find what I call interpretation. For example, the role of the Turks in the Christian salvation history of this time, or the opinions that often refers to propaganda and stereotypes of the Turkish fear, essays of historical wars that are reflected by the author's own perspective, and comparison between the Christians and the Turks, which can also be understood as a social criticism of their own position. And yeah, recommendations on how to successfully fight the Turks. To give you an example, here you can see the overview of a chapter in the travelogue of Salomon Schweiger, in which he discusses in detail the reasons for the Turkish victory against the Christians. And almost half of this chapter is dealing with the assumed divine assistance of God that he is giving to the Turks in Schweiger's point of view. And the image of the Turks as instrument of God in to punish the sinful Christians is a specific narrative in this time, and is deeply connected to the discussion on the Reformation in Germany. But I won't go into more detail about this. So after this introduction, which almost sounds like a sermon. You remember he's a preacher. He continues with the concept of an open nobility in the Ottoman Empire, the more equal legal system in the Ottoman Empire, the advantages of standing and well-paid armies like the one of the Ottomans, the virtues and shortcomings of his enemy. There's a section on why the economy of the population of the Holy Roman Empire is actually superior to the one of the Ottomans. And then there's some reason why it's still not working to fund the wars properly. And finally, he's dealing with the armament of the Ottomans. So he's describing the Janissaries, the Sipahis, and other types of troops. So yeah, as you can see in his travelogue, Salomon Schweiger not just informs his readers about the Ottoman army, he also gives some recommendation how to deal with them. And what is even more interesting, I think, is he connected this particular topic with the general discussion about politics and religion within the Holy Roman Empire. Before I come to an end, here are the first few results I got so far. So because of the ongoing conflicts, war remains a topic in German travelogues, and most of these travelogues emerge in the context of diplomatic legation to Constantinople. That's almost the reason why most of them are very similar in structure and even in content. So that makes it easier to compare them with each other, and the parallels and cases of intertextuality are already striking between these different travelogues. And the discourse about the Turks from the 16th century is deeply connected to the discourse about the Reformation, and somehow it's preserved and continues in the 17th century. And only with the change in the balance of power between the Habsburgs and the Ottomans in the late 17th century, this led to a slow transformation of the image on the Turks from intimidating enemy to a more let's say the image of the sick man at the Bosphorus in the beginning of the 20th century. But that should it be from my side for today. I hope you enjoyed my presentation, and I'm looking forward for your questions. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Simon, for sharing your research with us. So let's start with Yuval and next. Oh, okay. Yuval.
Okay, thanks so much, Simon. It's fascinating, and I have one comment and one question. I remember the question. My question is how travel through Constantinople and through the Ottoman Empire was for Europeans during this period. I mean, we're talking about kind of an ongoing war, but I know that a lot of Europeans, a lot of merchants still crossed territories of the Ottomans. So maybe you can tell how blocked were these territories and how open. This is one question and one comment. But again, I'm sure I'm not saying anything new, but you mentioned that some scholars tend to look at the travelogues as almost objective, and I suggest with red line beneath to take this very, very carefully, especially with travelogues, because I think, and it can be very interesting for a dissertation to see, I mean, for my, based on my experience with travelogues from China, the narrative changes completely if it's a political delegation or a merchant who's writing, and take the same delegation. It changes completely if the writer is the delegation's doctor, physician, or the head secretary. They have completely different views, and if the delegation was a successful one or a delegation that failed, so this can bring.
You have to look on the context, and
I think when you work with travelogues, you should be very careful about it, and it can also yield fascinating insights. So because travelogues are so rich.
Yeah, I agree. Absolutely. And about traveling to the Ottoman Empire, so you're right. War could be a problem, but like merchants, they always find a way to enter, and they were Europeans in one quarter of Constantinople in Pera all the time. But merchants didn't write a lot about, let's say, the people there. They doing their business, and maybe they don't have time for or no interest in gaining some knowledge about the German travel. So for them it was even harder. Like for the French, there was a French-Ottoman friendship, or let's say they were allies at some point. Strategic allies, and for them, for example, it wasn't a problem to go to Constantinople. For the Germans or the people from the Holy Roman Empire, these diplomatic legation was almost the only chance to go to Constantinople. So, but yeah. They weren't free to go everywhere, so they were very well guarded, and they only saw what the Ottomans showed them. And still, they have like there was a mode in during these legations to how to live together, or there were some freedoms. For example, Salomon Schweiger. He stayed there 5 years in Constantinople, and after he finished his service as a preacher, he asked the Sultan for Ferman to go to the Holy Land. So, and then he went there with some other Christians. So he mixed up like this diplomatic purpose with like pilgrimage, and yeah, I would say that there were a lot of opportunity to go to the Ottoman Empire, but less people published about it. And that's another thing. Why is someone publishing about his journal? And yeah, as you can see, this one happened just years after, when actually when there was a war between the Habsburgs and the Ottomans again. So there were some interest about
the book was published here?
During the long Turkish War. It just was at the end, but I think he worked on the book during the war, and then he published. And so there was a public interest because there was a war going on, and maybe that also inflected the way he wrote about it.
I think you can do a lot with this fact, with this gap between the time of his travel and the time of the writing, and the political setting that became completely different. So there's a lot to do here.
Yeah.
Yeah, so we'll continue. And so writing travelogues are always written within a genre. There's a European tradition with several subgenres.
Yeah, it just started, but yeah.
I think it goes back to Byzantium
To ancient,
ancient Greek
yeah.
and Byzantine reports
Yeah.
of pilgrimage and Marco Polo and Mandeville, and there are certain. And it's interesting to me that that this travelogue is a report of a pilgrimage. And I wanted to ask you if this is a common subgenre of the travelogue and text you're working with. If there are other genres, are you looking on, because it's such a popular genre, popular text? Sometimes travelogues tend to depart from reality, from actual travels. I don't know if there are texts like that, or if you're thinking about.
We're just asking if it's fake news.
No, it's the most exciting thing to read. Someone going to distant lands, and I mean, it's like
the Oriental.
It's sense the dawn
Yeah.
of history. European
Yeah, no,
history.
I know what you were asking for. So
Other first of all, if you're thinking about the genre, and when you look at the text, and second, are there other genres or subgenres of travel?
So travelogues as like a genre is just developing in the 16th century. Was a new genre when you have to differentiate like these pilgrimage reports, or you can say Marco Polo it's also a travelogue, but it's still developing. And the Renaissance and the humanism is very influential in this, because people at this time, the educated one wanted to be they don't make up any stories, they wanted to be precise on it. So they took some like I would say the modern how modern research or modern knowledge is gained. This whole system is developing in the beginning of the early modern period. And of course, the genre, also my sources are different in structure. I have some travelogues that are written like letters to not to a real person, but to more like it's like ancient type of to write to a friend. And I cannot think of an example because I'm not an ancient. Okay, thanks. Yeah. And there are sometimes you have diaries, so people just writing for themselves. Still, they publish these diaries, but and then you have travelogues like this one from Salomon Schweiger with he's describing the travel, the journey from Vienna to Constantinople. Then there will be a part during the stay in Constantinople with where the text is more like categories, like about the city, the buildings, about the religion in the city. So it's not like chronologies on, but more on different topics. And I would say this kind of like how a travelogue is supposed to look like, to have like the travel part, and then some dealing with some topics in categories. This is the part that became most popular into this genre, and then the whole genre is shaped like this. Or
isn't that the classic tradition?
Yeah, maybe it's a classic tradition. Okay, I don't know. But yeah, these authors were very highly influenced by the classical authors. Yeah.
Thank you so much. I think we will move next because we don't have time. I'm sorry.
That's fine.
It was fascinating.
Yeah, feel free to ask any questions.
I will ask you later.
All right. so that den ist die So, oops, okay.
Yeah,
And how does it? It's working.
No, it's working.
Oh, I'm impressed.
Let's continue. So, okay, just go ahead.
Okay. Yeah.
Sorry, we don't have a lot of time.
No problem. No, I think you know me already.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yes. In my dissertation project, as you can see, and as I have told you, I focus on war metaphors in the writings of the early Christian author Tertullian. I especially care about the function and the form of these metaphors. It's of course a work in progress. I started last year as a PhD candidate, but this topic, it took time to shape. And so I'm very happy if you have any advice, questions, everything after the talk. And yes, so let's move on. The first question, why war metaphors? I think the importance of war metaphors, especially war metaphors, has become particularly evident during the COVID-19 pandemic. Especially politicians have regularly described the pandemic as a war, medics as the soldiers, the virus as the threatening enemy, and the vaccine as the weapon. So some examples, some of 1,000 examples. For example, here a headline from The Guardian: Trump talks himself up as wartime president to lead America through a crisis. Or the governor of New York: the soldiers in this fight are our healthcare professionals. Or Antonio Guterres from the United Nations: we are at war with a virus and not winning it. Such metaphors can make a situation appear more urgent and make certain actions or decisions look acceptable, more acceptable, or rational, necessary, right, or wrong. So if we accept that we're in a warlike situation in the pandemic, then it's more likely that we are willing to make sacrifices, for example. This makes such war metaphors very powerful and important rhetorical tools, and they have been used not only during the pandemic, but in texts throughout histories. And they have also, as I will show in my dissertation project, hopefully, heavily used from early Christian authors, among them Tertullian, to make certain Christian actions look right or wrong, necessary, and thereby to shape Christian principles and also to shape a Christian identity. So what will I do? I will just give you very short, don't worry, very short overview about the main parts, about Tertullian. Why did I choose Tertullian to analyze war metaphors? And then a little bit of context, metaphors of war in early Christian sources. Then I want to go on with the questions, how do metaphors work? It seems like an easy question to answer, but in fact, there's much more behind it than you would think. And then I give you just one brief example how Tertullian uses this war metaphors. So why Tertullian? Tertullian is an early Christian author. He was born in Carthage in the Roman province of Africa in 155 AD. And he's often referred to as the father of Latin Christianity. That's because he's the first author, Christian author, that we know that uses the Latin language as his main language. Before it was only Greek. And he has written so many works. So 31 works are accessible to us today, and very different types of works: apologetics, dogmatics, polemics, and many, many more. But what really makes him interesting for me is that he converted to Christianity very late. So maybe 197, but we're not sure about that, but we're sure that it's very late in his life. And before,
he had the extensive, and I really mean extensive, pagan education in rhetorics, in law, in everything. And we can tell from hundreds of quotes, direct and indirect quotes in his works, that he knew the Latin classics like Virgil, Cicero, Caesar, Seneca, and many more. He knows them in every detail. And that makes him special because he's not only able to draw on Christian content and Christian rhetoric, but he is also able to use heavily Latin sources, Latin content, Latin rhetorical devices to adapt to his Roman audience. So just give you an overview. Of course, Tertullian is not the first author to use war metaphors. He's not even the first Christian author to use war metaphors. In fact, it was St. Paul in his letters who introduced these war metaphors, describing the Christian as a soldier for Christ. So stratiotes Christu Jesu, like in one of many examples here. And from Paul's letters on, this became a very famous thing. Almost all antique Christian writers from Paul on use this metaphor, this description of Christian as a soldier and Christian life as war. But the interesting thing about it is that, of course, every author has to adapt this metaphor to his language, to his specific audience, to his cultural and historical circumstances. And for example, Tertullian, he uses the Latin language, which is new in that way, new for Christian authors, to change this metaphor. And he uses specific Roman ideas, knowledge about soldiers and about war to make this metaphor more suitable for his audience. Okay, now the question, how do metaphors work? Our traditional view on metaphors, it's also called today as the comparison view, is that a metaphor formulates an underlying pre-existing similarity or analogy between two things. So there is a similarity between Christians and soldiers, and that's the reason why we are able to use this metaphor, why we are able to talk about Christians as soldiers, and that our audience can understand this and find it rational and not crazy. Why is he talking about Christians as metaphors? So there's a pre-existing underlying similarity between Christians and soldiers, or between Christian life and war. That's not the view we have today, because modern metaphor theories have changed our perspective completely. For example, or most of all, the conceptual metaphor theory, first described by Lakoff and Johnson in 1980. And this metaphor theory, they give us a completely new idea what metaphors are, and is now highly accepted in psychology, in linguistics, and also in the classics more and more. They say metaphors are not the expression of a pre-existing similarity, but what they do, they use ideas, knowledge from a source domain, in our case, warriors, soldiers, war, and to project it to a target domain, to Christians. That way, metaphors create similarity between two things that are not similar before. So what does it mean for us? If Paul, or later Tertullian, if they describe a Christian as a soldier of Jesus Christ, it's not because there is a pre-existing similarity between a Christian and a soldier, or between Jesus and the commander, but what they do, these authors, they use the ideas that are already in the culture about the relationship between the soldier and the commander, and they project it to define the relationship between a Christian and Christ, Christian and Jesus. So that way, Tertullian, he makes a specific use of the ideas someone has, how you should act as a soldier, to define the not yet defined relationship between Christians and Christ. So in other words, not all Christians in the first century might have exactly known how they should act in certain situations, but they for sure knew exactly, or had at least exact ideas, precise ideas, how soldiers should act in certain circumstances, and how soldiers should act towards their commander. So this makes metaphors, as I've said, a very powerful rhetorical tool because they can create a certain image of Christians and they can make certain actions appear rational, necessary, right or wrong. If we agree, or if the audience of Tertullian agrees that Christians are soldiers or soldier-like, they knew exactly how they should act in some situations. I give you just a small example from the book De Fuga in Persecutione about flight in persecution. And here Tertullian, he discusses the question how Christians should behave when persecuted. And here Tertullian says, I'm going to read it out, he presents himself as a worthy soldier before his commander Christ, he uses irony here, who, thus fully armed by the apostle, falls away from his commander on the day of persecution as soon as he hears the trumpet of persecution. Better is a soldier who is lost, which means gets killed in battle, than one who remains unwounded in flight. You have degraded Christ, who is in you, by handing yourself over to the devil as a fugitive. So Tertullian here uses the war metaphor, the assumption that Christians are soldiers and that Christ is their commander, in order to make a certain behavior during persecution rational and necessary. A good soldier has the duty to honor his commander, and it is definitely more suitable for a soldier to die in battle than to flee and to survive. Taking for granted now that a Christian is also a soldier, he is also not allowed to run away from persecution, which is his battle in the metaphor. If he did that, he would fail to honor Jesus Christ, his commander. So this was just a very short, brief insight into my work. I hope you have many questions, and thank you very much for your patience.
Not all of us together.
No, guys. It's fine. Charlotte, Michelle? So, thank you, Michael. Okay. Oh, Rafa.
Is the metaphor of war, okay, or army, life, being a soldier, can you see differences in soldiers? Because I don't know.
You mean especially?
Everyone knows what is war.
Yes.
Fleeing war, but I guess there would still be to do this metaphor in Israel.
Yes.
To do it
Yeah, of course, yeah. That's a very important question. So if I go back to this, so if we think about metaphors as the projection of ideas from about war and soldiers to Christianity, then of course it has to be very, very different, because in each culture, the ideas, the images, the knowledge about soldiers, about war is very different. And also the way you talk about soldiers, which words do you use, which words are common and which not, what traits does a soldier has, what is a good trait, what is a good soldier, what is a bad soldier. There are big differences also between Greek soldiers and Roman soldiers, and between the Greek language and the Latin language. And so this is one reason why Tertullian has to use a very different metaphor. Although it's the same metaphor, use it very differently than, for example, Paul and other Christians before. And later, also other Latin Christian authors use them differently. They have different role models of soldiers in their mind and also their audience. And of course, they must adapt. So yes, that's a very big point in my work. Yeah.
What is the metaphor here? You are comparing soldier with a Christian, commander with a Christ.
No, you're comparing the relationship between the soldier and this commander with the relationship of a Christian and Christ.
So this is the metaphor.
Yes.
Two sides of the.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
But what do we know about who was the audience of Tertullian?
That's another very interesting point, because he had very different target audiences. He wrote 31 or even more works, and in one work, his target audience are Romans, pagan Romans, and then the other, it's specifically people under persecution, Christians, and then Christians who are living a peaceful life, let's say it like that. So very different target audience, and we see that he adapts this metaphors to the different audiences. He uses very different ideas, Roman ideas and images to adapt. So if he talks about Christians as soldiers to a Roman pagan audience, he described them very differently. Yeah,
Yeah.
of course, yeah.
Yeah, I think at this point exactly the reception history can be very interesting because if we're looking at, about the historical framework of Tiberius, then it's a period in which Christianity is more or less being persecuted in a lot of areas in the Mediterranean, and when you use metaphors of military, then you can invoke even more antagonism, I guess.
Of course.
I mean, you present yourself as kind of a militant and dangerous.
Yeah.
So I wonder if you would you're going to deal with this kind of attitudes towards from the leaders.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, we never. I mean, what we have, we only have the sources from Tertullian, so we can only say what he uses, and but he's a very clever author, of course, and so we can think that he especially makes use of the ideas that are in his that are in the mind of his target audience, of course. Yeah, that's a very precise. That's a very decisive point. Yeah, absolutely.
Well, thank you. It was I have 2 questions for later.
Okay.
Move on.
One moment.
הוא גם
Tapping
תוציא
the
את הדיסקונקטיב בבקשה.